We have a company that does flower delivery. They have a online flower store as well as retail locations. And they were sending out Mother's Day promotions a week before Mother's Day. Probably a smart marketing tactic for a flower store.
Right.
0 messages delivered.
Wow.
0. And we went back through and we said, well, I wonder what this could be. And we went through and we were looking at it, ran it through TrueDelivery. Flower was a false positive.
Yeah. Awesome. Welcome back to the State of Business Texting podcast, where we talk about all things messaging. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for Messaging here at Bandwidth, and my co-host, Zach, who you normally hear from, is on vacation this week. But I'm joined, special guest, in the studio by Tim Sherwood. Tim is our General Manager, my boss, Senior VP of Product for Messaging. Thanks so much for joining me, Tim.
Thanks, Caitlin. It's a pleasure. Happy to be your Zach Up host today. Sorry about that. Just
Love that.
Since it's so close to Father's Day, couldn't resist a forced pun to start off the podcast. And, I'm always up for a great conversation about messaging. And today I'm really excited to have an awesome guest.
Yeah, that's right. We are actually joined by John Wright from TrueDialog. And TrueDialog is one of our 2025 Textie Award winners. The Textie Awards are given out to platforms doing really awesome, innovative things in messaging, and we're really thrilled to be highlighting TrueDialog today.
Thanks for joining us, John.
Thank you for having me. We're excited to be here, and I've made a career out of messaging. So excited to be honored with the award and talk with both of you today with regards to the State of the Union.
Awesome. Well, maybe we can get started with the conversation, just a little bit more of an introduction about yourself and TrueDialog and the work you're doing there.
Well, about me, I started my career working for a large data services company called Axiom Corporation out of Arkansas. And interestingly enough, it was messaging based. We were building large data warehouses back in the 90s, primarily for direct mail purposes. And in the late 90s, I was one of the first people on the team that started their email services back in 1996. And shortly after that, went to my first startup, which was an email messaging provider or email service provider, as they're now called today, called Flow Network. We grew that from 0 revenue to 40 million in recurring and sold it to DoubleClick, which is now part of Google, and have just enjoyed seeing the transformation from direct mail to email. And as things have moved along, saw a big opportunity with text. And there are a lot of things that I liked about it. And this company, I'm not the founder. I was brought in as CEO in 2014. And have really reshaped the entire business and platform and service offering around how to attack the opportunities that are available inside of text today. Although we have other services outside of text, it is our lead, and we are a text-first platform.
Well, as a text-first platform, speaking from a product management perspective, I'm sure that delivery is part and parcel to how you position yourself in the market. And I am cheating a little bit because I know a little bit about what you call TrueDelivery. But I'm curious, as you've been looking at solving for that value driver, that is delivery challenges or just delivery optimization in the SMS space, the messaging space rather, how have you looked at that challenge? How have you been approaching it? And maybe tell us a little bit about how TrueDelivery tackles some of those challenges.
It's a great question. And it's interesting to see the parallels between email and text, right?
Mm-hmm.
At first, when email was put on the market, it was, and everything was open. And as more and more less legitimate marketers and companies started taking a hold of text and really abusing it, the ISPs got smart and started implementing rules, IP blocking. There were also, IP block lists like Spamhaus and other platforms that provided basically block list of known spammer IPs. And then ultimately, the spam scoring engines kind of came along. Things like Spam Assassin is probably one of the more known ones that are out there today, building using technology to basically start scoring messages and saying this is spam or this isn't spam. And the same thing happened in text. And there have been several things that have been kind of cutoff moments inside of text. Short codes have always been very protected with regards to who's allowed to do it and who's not, specifically since they moved to removal of shared short codes, which I think were problematic. And then as the carriers started trying to figure out how to meet market demand with regards to offering enterprise messaging on long codes, a lot of people in mid-market and even upper market who still want the ability to call a number, they started, I think developing things like 10DLC is probably the thing that was most likely. And, once the rollout of 10DLC happened, the carriers were also still and continue to this day using spam detection technologies. Content filtering is probably the most used piece. And with the advent of AI, things got even better in protecting our ecosystem. I think it's somewhat protected already because unlike email, canned spam came after email was already a dominant communication tool for businesses. Text is very fortunate in that the rules were written as it became a dominant player. So I think it remains a very protected ecosystem, and I think it will remain that way for a long time. Doesn't mean that there are still bad actors. So the carriers themselves have implemented spam scoring systems, and we started looking at that, and having my experience in email really helped inside of developing TrueDelivery. Specifically, we looked at, well, what's going on inside of email? And there are things like, there's a company called Pivotal Veracity, which was acquired by IBM. There's another company called Return Path. There is another company called Email on Acid, which was acquired by another company in the space.
Great name.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
And
what kind of product?
Horrible marketing, but effective tools for customers to use. The situation is really a lot different, though, in that those applications really required them to go through, set up email accounts in all the major domains. They set up individual email accounts for their users. They created seed list. They would send them out of their platform, and they would basically measure deliverability and content rendering inside of those applications and provide feedback to the users. It's post-mortem. It's after the fact. What we decided to do was, since there is a lot better, I want to say, delivery notifications to the messaging ecosystem with regards to when the message hits the carrier, when the carrier delivers it to the handset, if it's blocked, why, if it's undelivered, why, if it's never reaching the handset, there's a lot of things that you can tell about messaging behavior as it goes out. And we are processing, we use Bandwidth as one of our service providers. You guys see that's just one of our channels that we use. Mm-hmm. We send a lot of volume, so we get a lot of delivery codes. And I challenged my development team and a really smart developer. I challenged my CTO and a new developer that we had who really came out of school with an interest and a discipline in AI-related technologies, and said, how can we deploy this using a pre-screen technology and looking at what's delivered, what's not, building the algorithms to basically go through and do detection and say, what is the likelihood of this message getting delivered prior to our customers actually hitting send? And it has been paramount, both in our, we offer both bulk messaging as well as one-to-one messaging. And it's been paramount in the use of both of those, in that sometimes, as you guys are well aware, there are a lot of false positives that are generated out of the carrier ecosystem, and it creates a lot of frustration. And our customer service teams were suffering a little bit because they, as 10DLC enforcement went in place, and customers the carriers also kind of ratcheted down their screening there were a lot of false positives that were happening. One that probably was the one that woke me up was we have a company that does flower delivery. They have a online flower store as well as retail locations, and they were sending out Mother's Day promotions a week before Mother's Day. Probably a smart marketing tactic for a flower store.
Right.
0 messages delivered.
Wow.
0. And we went back through and we said, well, I wonder what this could be. And we went through and we were looking at it, ran it through TrueDelivery. Flower was a false positive.
Yeah.
And we said, well, why would they be screening the word flower? So we went back through and we started looking at things, and apparently cannabis companies, which is prohibited content on the carrier platforms, doesn't mean that they still don't use text. We're using the word flower in place of, other words that are, basically referenced inside of the world of cannabis. I don't smoke marijuana. Nor do I have any problem with it. I just, I don't drink, I don't smoke. I just thought it was interesting. And obviously we were able to go and report that and have that false positive removed and allow this merchant to be able to effectively market. But just an idea of one of a million things that can happen along the messaging stream. And our tool sets are ever evolving as the content screening is ever evolving. And it's very easy to tell, kind of right off the bat. We just give a percentage and likelihood of delivery that before you even send a message, here's what the likelihood of delivery is. And our customers have fallen in love with this technology.
And I'm assuming they're able to connect those higher delivery rates to their own sort of business impacts. And I'm sure that's much more meaningful, whether it's, less blocked messages means more bookings. It means more appointments. It means less churn. I mean, depending on the business, I'm curious, how often do you see that result from your customers that you serve?
Well, I mean, a message undelivered is a message that has no chance of getting a response. So,
fair.
And it doesn't matter if it's a e-commerce merchant. It doesn't matter if we have a very large presence inside of higher education, inside of healthcare, and inside of sports and entertainment. Those are 3 verticals which we really have solid representation across. And just for example, a university who is sending out the financial aid platform that most universities are on is called FASFA, S-F-A-S-F-A. And it's the where students go to apply for student aid. And
very familiar. That is like distant trauma bells ringing.
Yes.
Or if you're a parent, very near trauma bells. So depends on your stage of life.
And, you have, let's just say, a university that has, 100 admissions and enrollment agents and 50 financial aid representatives that are working there helping students during the enrollment and admissions process and an application for financial aid. Well, if you've got 100 in there, and by the way, high turnover jobs, and they use the word loan instead of FAFSA or financial aid, what do you think happens? Blocked.
Yeah, it gets
Why?
caught up.
Because one of the biggest abusers of the prior to 10DLC, we just called it long code messaging platforms, was payday loan. And
collections.
Collections has its own set of rules. And I think that, I think that those are viable businesses. But when I look at payday loan, and specifically subprime credit offerings from non-lenders, mainly, they were doing, I think that the biggest abusers of that system were lead gen companies, and they would go in and they would find people who were in financial dire straits. They would sell that lead 20 times and then they would try to convert it. And obviously loan is a word that was used. And because of the overuse of that word, it created delivery problems. And there's, again, false positives, financial aid department for a large, NCAA, Division I school who has 50 or 100,000 students that they're currently there. Let's just say if it's 100,000 students across all their campuses, 75,000 are on some form of aid. in financial aid, people were erroneously using the word loan. And then they were like, well, they never got back to me. And that student never made it through financial aid and missed their start because they couldn't get the financial aid they needed. So it's across all industries. Same thing. And, ticketing for professional sports franchises. I've got this very long URL that takes them directly to their ticketing. I'm going to use a URL shortener. I'm going to use tiny.url. Guess what doesn't get delivered? Any message that has one of the prominent link shorteners that are out there today. Good companies, but goo.gl. I'm anxious to see how that works inside of RCS when it becomes available. But since Google is the provider of that platform, but I don't know that the carriers really care. Anything that's a link shortener and has been suspect to a lot of abuse by less than desirables, we'll call them. And it's I'd love to tell war stories someday after the pod with you all with regards to, we say no to more business than we say yes to, because we are very protective of our application and our carrier relationships and our vendor relationships with companies like Bandwidth.
Yeah, I very cool. I talk about that as far as you've got your KYC up front. It's like the guard to get in the door. Then you have the ongoing security and monitoring, but then you have the necessary offboarding process where it's sort of like you're showing the exit. It's all three parts. Managing a messaging business is unfortunately all three parts, and part of that is saying no. So
and the bad guys keep getting smarter.
Yeah. You've highlighted a little bit about what's wrong in the industry today with regards to false positives. Mm-hmm. All those false positives had original roots in legitimate bad practices that was going on. And so we're constantly evolving our algorithms, trying to clean up those false positives. That's something that's ongoing as part of our best practices as an industry. But I'm curious, having been in the industry so long, what else would you maybe shine a spotlight on?
The first things first, which is I don't think that there's any way that humans can keep up with the evolution of AI at the carrier side, right? So false positives will be mitigated over time as AI becomes more and more intelligent. Machine learning practices are able to better detect. I think one of the neat things that we're kind of looking forward to is some of the new technologies coming along and seeing how they are going to impact the ecosystem. Really the biggest one, and again, I make a lot of parallels because of my messaging experience in, kind of some of the upcoming technologies like RCS. And, I think, we're kind of looking forward a little bit into application of technologies like TrueDelivery and how they can be applied to things like RCS. The parallel that I make is that, in the early days of email, everything was text, and then AOL came out and offered rich text inside of their email editors. And then, somewhere around 99 or 2000, I think 99, HTML became the dominant format with regards to how messages, because they were just a lot prettier, they were a lot more responsive, they were able to include images and just an overall better end user experience. With RCS, the branding in the from line, the image capabilities, which in our testing are not available kind of in the early outputs of RCS. But I remember kind of going back and thinking, what's going to happen next with regards to, this deliverability stuff? I think that the same thing is going to happen in that they're going to start tracing back, where are the images? Is this image consistent with things that are being marked in text? Is this image consistent? Our link shortener is still going to work for redirect sitting behind those images, because now, unlike MMS, there can actually be a redirect that sits behind the image that leads you to a customer's webpage. If there are other things that we've seen is that on redirects, if there are affiliate type links, specifically, stuff that's highly correlated to lead gen, those are going to cause breaking and probably blocking. So we're just consistently testing on how we can run all parts of the messaging through our application. And we're also looking at more traditional methods with regards to how are things going to render? How can we do post delivery and do things like, can we set up phone numbers outside of just our test bank accounts on each of the carriers to test delivery at a client by client level and understand, how that's going to work. So it becomes interesting in every aspect as far as, how we're looking at the future. I don't think that content screening is going away, unless, AI comes and just becomes a smart delivery tool and can almost block it, and the carriers are using it at point of delivery. I think that, the existing techniques have already been developed with regards to, hey, here's how you develop a heuristic scoring model that goes through and assigns an overall score to your content and to your imaging and to your delivery numbers, which, is another big input. Numbers get flagged. I think the good news is that most of it at this point, numbers are getting flagged. I think the other thing that is really, really, really super important, and the carriers were smart in how they deployed this. A lot of the carriers are ISPs as well. And I think that with 10DLC, that allows them to basically go through and control who has access by simply saying, listen, I don't care what the content is. They've been habitual, and we're going to pull the net num ID off of our network. And which, for those of you who are listening in and don't know what that is, part of the campaign registry process and going through and applying for your brand and then applying for your campaign, there is what's called a net num ID, which is basically the numbers that the carrier use to say, is this an allowed number or is it not, before it allows anything on. Then it goes through additional screening. So there's kind of several levels. And I think that we're also interested to see, since, Google has its own registration process, how that's going to look and how that's going to impact the ecosystem, because I don't know that those two are necessarily talking. With regards to, okay, RCS, you have to go through a registration process. I would imagine that at some point in the future, if I had to predict, be Karnak for those Johnny Carson fans back in the day and say, what do I predict is going to happen? Just like we predicted and saw that 10DLC registration is going to really start mimicking shortcode applications. It'll just be a lot faster because there's some automation on the front end and the vetting procedures. How is RCS, since this registration is separate from 10DLC, how is that going to be impacted, and how are the carriers going to handle that? And then how are we going to handle delivery down the line based off of that? Because I think that everyone's still trying to figure it out. The rule book has not been written. So I think we're all kind of in a wait and see with regards to the future of that. And then, I think that it'll follow just like short code and long code into 10DLC, and the restrictiveness with regards to, Google has this process. Well, how much do the carriers trust their process in keeping clean traffic on their networks?
John, you mentioned a little bit around RCS and the value of the branded messaging, and also the value, obviously, of the rich images. Are there any other types of capabilities that you're looking forward to enabling for your customers? Any sort of initial set of use cases that come to mind across the different verticals you support that you're excited about shifting over from SMS, MMS to RCS?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that, from what we've seen on the business side of RCS in our testing is that the initial rollout of it is going to be branding and some very light graphical capabilities. Nowhere near what's going on in Europe right now. I think that the way to kind of look at where the application and use cases are going to come from is to look across the pond and see what's going on over in Europe. They were early adapters of this, and I think that as the carriers and the Google already has the capabilities, but as the carriers are able to start accepting inside of their networks, the carousel, I think, for things like, and you can go look up RCS carousel. It's basically an ability. I think e-commerce is going to really jump on things like the carousel, because they can, instead of having one image of a men's clothier showing a sports jacket, they can have a sports jacket, they can have shirt, they can have men's, accessories, they can have shoes. And it can be a carousel inside of the text message that has all of those things with the links that will drive the user to that end content. A lot more efficient and a lot more opportunistic with regards to not only broadening the offering inside of text, in other words, increasing its usability, but I think also in increasing response rates because of the wider product offering that things like the RCS carousel can offer. I think that there is an enormous benefit of it, which I think goes unrecognized in some cases. But I'm sure you've got a pretty advanced user base here of people listening. And for those of you who might not be as advanced as Caitlin and Tim here, our users who might be listening to this are still kind of trying to figure things out. RCS, really, the derivative of it really came out of a competition between two OSs, iMessage on Apple and RCS on Android. And if you think about it from an analogy standpoint, it's really like RCS and Beta Max, if you think back to the early days of video cassettes.
Right.
Betamax was a superior platform for watching movies. VHS was less expensive. Ultimately, I think that VHS won out, as we all know, back when people used to not stream and have to go to the store and get videotapes. That became the dominant platform. I don't know that there's a better or worse, but with regards to iMessage and RCS, for one-to-one texting for businesses, I think that the ability for a lot of our customers who are doing one-to-one messaging, being able to see when an end user is constructing a response and building the bubble at the bottom of the screen, and understanding that I haven't gotten a response yet, but I'm about to get one. What an awesome way to understand and be prepared for what's to come. As opposed to now, you send a message and it sits out in the ether, and you know that it was delivered to the handset, but you have no idea if the user is there, if you've caught them at a good time, and if they're responding. RCS provides that bubble saying that someone's interacting. The trustworthiness, I think one of the reasons why iMessage works so well is people love talking to people who they got the blue bubble from, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the branding that's involved
elitists.
In that, yes, it's the research that you guys and other companies inside of our industry have noticed is just that it is the trust that you have when you see the blue bubble versus someone that doesn't. And I also as last week we started seeing wider adoption, Fortune 100 primarily, but the two that I get, and when I knew that RCS was formally launched was the two that I follow that I got RCS messages from were Walgreens and FedEx. Both started down the RCS messaging path. I was literally getting a package delivered at the end of May, beginning of June, and on June 3rd, on May 29th, I got a package update that my delivery was out the door. Here's the tracking number. And on the 2nd or 3rd of June, I got an RCS message from FedEx that had a nice FedEx brand in it and said, your package is delivered. And I said, the new world has arrived, because it's an exciting time. But I also think it's important to temper our expectations. The carriers have a lot of work to do before the more refined pieces of RCS become available.
Well, as an individual consumer, I still see the vast majority of messages I get are traditional SMS, but I am greatly looking forward to getting more and more RCS messages as they come through. And that's really one of the things that I love about the messaging business is how we can relate it from a product strategy perspective at work back to our individual selves. And it's so relatable. So one thing we like to do on the podcast, Caitlin and Zach like to ask all of our guests is, what's the best text message that you received this past week? Can you share a little bit on that?
Could be best, could be most interesting, could be worst. I mean, it's just, it's your context. Yeah.
Most memorable, maybe.
Yeah. Not required to be A to P.
Well, it probably the best one, and it was from a bad experience. My wife and I had booked a restaurant and a new place here in Austin that on the water, and which there's I don't know, probably 6 or 7 restaurants that are in kind of central Austin that you can sit on Lake Austin or Lake Travis and have a nice meal at. So the ambiance is fantastic. We sat and waited for 45 minutes once we had been sat at our table before we even got water.
That's
By the
crazy.
way, food was outstanding. Service was very lacking. So, as you do oftentimes after I gave good scores on the food, I gave good scores on the ambiance, and I just gave it a 0 on service. And I said, be prepared to wait. We sat at our table for 45 minutes before we got water and any attention. And also, noticeably saw our waiters sitting around on their phones instead of working, and made the comment. And interestingly enough, I got a very nice note back from the general manager of the restaurant. And he said, "We appreciate your feedback, and we understand that, you had some service problems. We'd like you to come back in and try again. Please accept our apologies. And as a token of our gratification to try to get you to come back in, please present this, and please, when you make your reservation, please let us know so I can make sure that we don't repeat the same experience." And I think the nice part of that is, number one, it was almost immediate.
Wow.
Which, I think is something that, being heard, I think, and the biggest difference that, and I'm again going back to the differences between email and text is, with email, I used to frustrate me in our business in that we had customers that would send out millions of messages a month and driving traffic to their commerce sites. We also saw an enormous amount of traffic coming in. Where's my order? And I think the thing that left unchallenged, and to this day is still a challenge, is that if you get an email promotion and you respond, no one's paying attention. With text, you have to. And I think that this example in the restaurant, who I'm going to remain nameless at this point,
Fair.
I think that shows the true value of, after every night they send a follow-up, please tell us how your experience was, rate this, food, ambiance, service, and I think the other one is price and noise. Those are the 5 things that they kind of qualify on. And when I responded and filled that in, how did they hit me up? Sent a text and saying, "Thank you. We never like to hear these type of things, and we're listening." And it's a chance to save a customer who is suffering, as opposed to continuing to pound them with more promotional materials and not doing anything about their inquiry or the feedback that they provided.
Yeah, I love that. It creates a conversation. It's customer experience management, using more of a one-way channel on reviews, but then creating the two-way channel with the conversation, with the feedback, with the extending of the offer to come back to try again. So that is an amazing example of a good worst text message that you received. Well, John, today's conversation has been amazing. We covered an insane amount of ground in the last 30 minutes or so. I would love to leave listeners with a way to reach out to you if they have additional questions, comments, feedback, just want to engage with you online. So where can people connect with you?
Well, obviously, our website is TrueDialog.com, TrueDialog. And you can, there are several ways to contact us on the website. We have chat. There's form fills where you can request more information, or you can reach out to sales@TrueDialog or info@TrueDialog, depending on what the nature of your inquiry is. If it's just general information, you can go to info. And if it's sales related and you'd like to speak with a member of our sales team, you can reach out to sales@. So anything that's press related, there's a press link on there as well. Jody, you guys have had been fortunate enough to meet, will respond to any additional outside press who's probably listening to this as well.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. I feel like I did all the talking today.
You know what? Here's the thing. You're the guest, and it makes our job a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I
Definitely
really appreciate it. Yeah.
No worries.
Appreciate both you and Tim for joining me today. And listeners, just to wrap up for our listeners, you can catch up on episodes on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And then be sure to head over to stateofmessaging.com where you can watch the full Textie Awards. See John collect his award, and watch the full show featuring all of our Textie Award winners. Stateofmessaging.com is also where you can download your free copy of the 2025 State of Messaging Report. Tim, John, thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank you
Caitlin.
so
Thanks,
much.
John. Appreciate it. Take care.
All right.